Hello everyone. Thank you for those of you who purchased the manual. For those of you who have not purchased the manual, I expect you should be purchasing it soon. Thank you very, very much. It means a lot to me that you have such faith in the work that I've done. I would like to discuss these new expanded and augmented guidelines, of which there are many. If you go to PAScribe.us, on the description page of the manual, you will see this guideline. So these are some free guidelines that you get, and the guidelines are numbered, so it's sort of easier for you to figure out what they are. Number 12, it tells you the X height, and it tells you what it works best with, a pen. This is number 13. The X height is 8 millimeters, and it works best with a pen, essentially a nib. These are for majuscules, as we see at the top, and this one is for minuscules. You also get a really comprehensive outline of all of the guidelines which have been made. So this tells you what number, and that is the corresponding page number. So we see here the first page, 01, brush, majuscules and minuscules, 14 millimeters. And we have here brush grid, and we then have 14 millimeters, number 1. If we look at this together, you can see 1, 1, brush, brush, 14 millimeters, 14 millimeters. So we tried to sort of lay this out in a way that will help you to find things much more easily. Now, all of the downloads, whether or not you have the free downloads, which are the majuscules and minuscules you find in the back and front covers of the manual, the contact form download, of which you get something like 14 guidelines, and then the purchase order download. So if you purchase the manual via the PAScribe.us shop site, you will get some additional guidelines which are nowhere else. They all come with this information, and this information sheet essentially outlines what these different guidelines are for. This video is to help you understand how to apply the guidelines. So let's get started. I am going to start with sheet number 1. Sheet number 1 is the brush guideline sheet. Just gonna raise this a little bit more so you have the whole sheet. Some of the guidelines might look a little confusing. I would suggest you pay attention to what they look like once you've put them underneath a piece of paper. So what I've done here is I'm using some layout paper. So in the UK we have a fairly thin paper that we call layout paper, which is really lovely to work through. You can see guidelines quite easily. You can purchase some acetate and print the guidelines onto acetate. It makes it a little bit easier to see. I used a Fude 8, a Kuretake Fude 8 in the book, in the manual, and I also recommend a Kuretake Zig Clean Color Real Brush. So these work really well on this particular size. Now I am using my augmented brush hold, which is a hold that I developed to write Copperplate Script with. It's sort of a third Chinese, a third Japanese, and a third my own invention. Those of you who've seen me write like this before, I use a very upright hold with a minimum amount of movement, and it's the wrist that does the movement. So we have, so these are all 55-degree lines. And so I'm working with within or within the halves. So I'm using the halves to really help me understand how the script works. Of course, this only really comes once you start using the other guidelines. So of course, this is the Fury 8. And so this gives you a sense of how the guidelines work. And I'm only really showing you this with a brush first because it's guideline sheet number 1. The next set of guidelines I'm going to move to are the guidelines we find on the descriptions page. So these are your free guidelines, and these guidelines are the guidelines in the front and back cover, inside, front and back cover of the manual. So here we have the majuscules, and of course I'm using the technology that I developed for the manual to build what I'm going to show you. So those of you who have been working with the guidelines or working with the previous guidelines, it's the same sort of principle. And as you know, the letters work within this grid. Now, I just want to explain a little bit about how and why I've structured the grid the way I have. If you look at the guidelines, you will see that they are shaded and there are breaks in the shading. So this is not shaded, this is shaded, this is not shaded. The reason for that is a lot of you like to write with the baseline next to the ascender line. I'm giving you enough space to practice the letters inside of these boxes individually so that you have space around the letter to make notes. So for instance, if I've done this, I can plot the angular confinement and look at what I'm trying to do and go, so this is how I make my notes. That little arrow tells me something's wrong there. What's wrong with this angle? What's wrong with this angle? Is this correct? So this has gone over that box. This has gone over that line. So I'm just putting little arrows to help me understand what's going on. And you could even write little bits of notes to tell you where you're going wrong. And that's why I've left this much space around the individual shaded boxes. Now, just to go on to the guidelines themselves, if you're looking at the manual, I tend to start the line of universal beauty here for things like the letter B. I'm just plotting an angular confinement for the letter B, because I know I want to do a letter in here. As you can see, that is keeping me within this box. So if we write a letter B within the confinement or using the confinement, little turn, half the parallelogram, aim for the half, aim for the middle, the turn is there to there, and 1, and up and over and down and up and over and back and out and out. So this gives us the bounding zone or the bounding boxes for the first guidelines which are on the inside of the manual. We'll just go over to the to the minuscules and we'll look at the free guidelines for the minuscules. And we see here the minuscules use, let's get this aligned properly. Sorry about this. We'll see the minuscules have a baseline, an X height, an ascender, and a descender. And we're working within these parallelograms. So we're writing a series of letters. What we'll find is we will see up at 55, down at 55, up and over and down, and up and over and down, and out. So what we'll find with these letters is they will sit within this parallelogram structure. And this is where you can play with the guidelines a little bit. For instance, you can, notice how fine I'm writing, you can work on the lines. So the guidelines become your center line. You can work within them. You can work on them. And they give slight variations in the internal width of the letter. But of course, the thing to consider is the weight of the thickest part of the stroke. So one of the things that, that I looked at with the guidelines is the guidelines really help you because they also tell you what the thickest width could be within this letter. And it's, there we go. So usually, I tend to say that the guideline is the width of a sixth of the letter because you're sort of doing a sixth on one side and a sixth on the other side. So that gives you a really nice, that really gives you a little bit of an indication as to how much you should be pressing with the nib. And those are the free guidelines that you'll find on the descriptions page, and I will make another video to talk through the more complex guidelines. Thank you very much.